Welcome back. This video will cover Learning Objective 7.5, where we will be identifying strategies for resisting efforts at persuasion for Chapter 7, Attitudes and Attitude Change for PSY 235, Social Psychology. One of the most tried and true approaches to resisting persuasion, and persuasion can lead to attitude change, is something called attitude inoculation. Attitude inoculation involves making people resistant to attempts to change their opinions by exposing them to arguments against their already held position. If you think back, I don't know, what your experiences have been, but when I was in high school, there were what were called DARE programs, where they would bring people in and they would run these skits. They were trying to get kids to be resistant to taking illicit drugs. So they would have you do role plays where you would practice resisting persuasion. You would practice coming up with counter arguments when people would try and push you into saying, hey, come on, try some pot. It makes you feel really good. It's no big deal. Just try it. Everyone's trying it. And then you would practice using arguments against that and practice strategies for getting out of those kinds of situations. Now, the research on these types of programs is mixed, but the research in the laboratory for attitude inoculation actually shows good effects. And when you follow the process of attitude inoculation as prescribed by the researchers, then the programs tend to work pretty well. So essentially, what happens is if you think about counter arguments, like how am I going to resist the attempt of the car salesman to convince me to buy a more expensive car than what I want? And if they don't have a car that I want right now, how do I resist their attempts to get me to switch to a different car? So you have to have counter arguments built up in advance so that you will have them ready to toss back at the salesperson when they come at you with them. When we think about them, we can become relatively immune to later persuasive communications. If people haven't thought about it much in advance, then they get sort of a sneak attack with the persuader coming at them. They may not be able to resist those attempts at persuasion as well. And especially if the persuader, say the salesperson, comes at them with the peripheral route, talking about things that will kind of tweak people's emotions, then they will be particularly vulnerable to changing their attitudes, at least momentarily, when they don't have those counter arguments really built in. Another way that you can be resistant to advertising appeals is be aware that every kind of media that you consume, when you're on streaming services, you're watching shows that you like these two images. One is Daniel Craig as James Bond on the phone, but you have this computer, a Vaio, where you can clearly see the brand name, and he's using it being all James Bondy and stuff. But the ad, this is basically an advertisement for Vaio, for Sony Vaio, saying if James Bond uses it, I should use it. You're watching an action movie. You're not really thinking that, but that nugget of a possibility is stuck in your head because product placement relies on peripheral route persuasion. So it's sitting there next to Daniel Craig. It must be super cool. The bottom image is of, I think, season 1 of Stranger Things. And there were two products that were heavily marketed in that first season, Eggo waffles and Coca-Cola. So basically, the producers of Stranger Things have a deal. Coke pays them to put their products with the brand name easily seen in the program, with the goal of saying, you're going to associate the emotions you had while watching Stranger Things and your excitement about the show, it's going to then transfer onto Coke products or Eggo waffles, for that matter. So many companies will pay the producers of TV shows, of movies, even novels. Long-standing series like James Patterson novels, he has had a long-time brand relationship with Coke products. Like one of his big detectives is a hardcore Diet Coke drinker, and it's mentioned over and over. He also has a product placement deal with Mercedes. So the guy has a Mercedes. He's had product deals with other car brands showing up in his novels repeatedly. So what they want you to do with product placement is that you don't realize that anyone's even trying to influence you. They're just trying to capitalize on associating their product with something very exciting or with a character that people love. That is going to, through the misattribution of emotion, will make you like the product more. Since we're embedded in the movie or the TV show or in the novel, we're not going to take the time to generate counter arguments. We're not going to say, why is that Coke can there? She's just a kid who likes Coke. Right? You're just going to miss it. You're just not going to pay attention to it. When you look at the still photos, though, and the movie isn't playing, then it becomes super obvious that it's a product placement. The can is oriented very specifically in a way that you can read the full logo. The computer is oriented so that you can very easily see the name of the brand, and so on. But if the movie is playing, you may not notice it as strongly. But if you see that ad later for that specific product, those good feelings will be prompted, even though you don't know why. Now, if we give people forewarning, if we show them a piece of media and we tell them in advance, now be on the alert, be on the lookout for product placement, then people will see it, they'll notice it, and they'll dismiss it. That's when we have less impact from those product placement attempts. There's also been a lot of research on resisting peer pressure. Many times we are in situations that are highly emotional, and we feel pressure coming from people we like or who we want to like us, and that distracts us from using logic, and we are much more responsive to emotional appeals. So one of the best predictors, as your authors state, of whether adolescents are going to use things like marijuana or to use tobacco is whether or not they have friends who also do so. That sort of social pressure is really, really powerful, particularly in adolescence, but it really doesn't diminish that much when we become even older. So we really don't like to be rejected by our peers. We don't like to feel like we're going to be viewed negatively, like we're going to be seen as, lame or whatever. At the same time, we want to feel like we have free will and autonomy. So you're in a real conundrum there. If your peer group is trying to get you to do something you don't really want to do, you want to feel like you have freedom and autonomy, but you also don't want to be tossed out of your social group. So you may actually convince yourself that you are engaging in the behavior that your peers want you to engage in, even though you didn't want to before. In order to prevent this, McGuire's attitude inoculation approach actually is effective. If you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, I know my friends want to do X. I don't want to do X. I think it's dangerous. I think it's bad for me. I think it's not a good thing for me to do. And you have a list of reasons why. If you explore those counter arguments and then you practice, what if they say this? What if they say this? And you have your response in mind, then you can come back at all of the persuasion attempts and escape without being persuaded. Another theory that's relevant to this situation of resisting persuasion is reactance theory. If you want to prevent people from being persuaded, you can tap into their really strong desire to not fall prey to persuasive appeals. So reactance theory is this idea that if I tell you you must do something, many people will kind of sit up straighter and say, make me. And that's the essence of reactance theory. The stronger the rule against something, the more likely it will backfire. And if the messaging about don't do this thing is really kind of pedantic and hostile, like this sign is actually kind of a meme. It's a sign that says, notice, don't throw stones at this sign. Even though it's very polite, please do not throw stones at this sign. Thank you. But the sign appears to have been pelted with rocks. In fact, messages like this that are soft, please don't throw stones, and you say thank you, actually tend to work pretty well. So we need to explore this a little more fully beyond the jokes. Here's the basic rule. People don't like feeling like their freedom is being taken away from them. They don't want to feel threatened that way. So what some researchers like Pennebaker and Sanders did was they went into a situation like writing graffiti on bathroom walls, which is, a recreational sport for some people. And they wanted to compare different kinds of admonitions. So they had one of two signs that they put in bathrooms on their college campus. And they wanted to see, the dependent variable was how much graffiti shows up on the walls. So they wanted to see which one was more effective in reducing the amount. So one was a big threat. Do not write on these walls under any circumstances. That implies that bad things will happen to you if you do. The other sign was mild. Please don't write on these walls. So the please is a request. It's not a demand. So the first message, do not write on these walls under any circumstances, is designed to provoke reactance. Whereas the mild prohibition, please don't do this, suggests, it's just not nice to do it. Please don't. It arouses less reactance. When the researchers went back after 2 weeks, they measured how much graffiti was written. And what they found, the mild message, please don't write, led to significantly less graffiti. So that shows a pretty simple strategy for reducing, for resisting persuasion in a very simple context. And that concludes my coverage of Chapter 7.